2 glasses, cheese, and bread. Walking the sound of water, white-capped sound of water, or a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon set on a linen tablecloth, cold water, crystal goblets unexpectedly at midnight, purple lupine on the hillside, beside the Dempsey dumpster in town, walking down to the water where the homeless gather, a flower dress, unexpected woodland events, white-capped spring water in winter, or a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon set on a linen tablecloth, cold water, a flower dress, the smell of hops and honey, the smell of green grass, outflow of stones by the river, the smell of front door grass, under the eaves of by the river, the cabin where we were working, the sound of water, white-capped mountains, purple lupine on the hillside, making love.
Electronic literature is forms of literature that make use of the computer or the network context to achieve effects that wouldn't be possible in print.
My birth takes place more than once in the plea of a bygone monster, from a muddy hole by corpse light, under the needle and under the pen. Or it took place not at all. But if I hope to tell a good story, I must leapfrog out of the muddle of my several births, to the day I parted for the last time with the author of my being and set out to write my own destiny.
So it might start with smell when that's possible in the future. At present it starts with image very dominantly and proceeds through text to sound in kind of a hierarchy, which I very much dislike. But I think the opportunities within that for interaction between those different senses and different means of generating stuff are just fantastic, particularly when we bring similar algorithms to bear on all of them. And we see their interactions both at the code, the sonic, the visual, and the meaning level.
Electronic literature is the exploration of concepts beyond the ordinary using electronic means. And in traditional vision-based media, you have moving pictures, you have more traditional genres such as, printed text where things don't move around, but electronic literature involves exploring how we take concepts, how we perceive the world and ourselves, and trying to portray that using computation, using the specific processes that are unique to computers.
There are 2 main literary parents for me for the fiction, and one of them is Thomas Pynchon, and Gravity's Rainbow, which is a novel which contains within it music hall numbers, popular songs, equation. There are no visible artworks, but there is a tremendous reference to the language of art and film and music and theater, and that was a mental model for me, that the novel did not have to proceed in a linear fashion using only narrative.
Electronic literature for me is literature that takes advantage of the capacity of new media to alter the state of writing.
It's literature that engages its digitality.
I remember sitting in my office in Jackson, Michigan, in community college, and thinking, damn, I'm going to have to teach people how to read this thing.
Prepared, sugar is not a volume. In the glass doors, these circumstances, very clean that there is no seen variety, very small there is no pleasure, overly moist prepared, sugar is not a volume. Not having examined the room, grabbing at these rags, kindness, related to the vulture, and however, in varying sides and the door, for the sake, journey to use, last, they are double, for the sake, and rapid exploration requires most common classes, while the bodies, by the crowd, justified by appeal.
Electronic literature is 2 words that go together, resonate together. I suppose I would say it can be considered practice involving text that resonates with considerations of media, resonates with problems of media or platforms of media, taking advantage of platforms of media, as Amrit said, or for me, resonating with conceptual issues involving mediation and digitization of information communication.
So the first screen you see is this big image made in Mac Paint, if anyone knows what that is. It's just like a splash page, an image of the patchwork girl herself. Click through it to what is essentially a title page, Patchwork Girl or a Modern Monster by Mary Shelley and herself. And from here you have links to 5 different sections of the text: the graveyard, the journal, the quilt, the story, and something called broken accents.
I think electronic literature is literature which requires a device to be read, and the device has to be electronic.
I worked with artist books. I was influenced by the works that I saw at Camera Works, by Works in San Jose, which is by the art space at San Jose State that Stephen Moore curated. So I was in a field that was halfway between visual arts and halfway between writing. And of course performance art also that I was associated with, and the artist books. So those were interests that I continued with.
Electronic literature is machine-enabled stories, poems, images that are not available only as traditional print or sculptural events. They're mediated by machines, and they don't exist in a format that the other arts have traditionally taken.
Boxes, raising the dirt, only several colors. Tall the one cluster away, variety each a method, package of seeds,
disparate.
the several not
Stone
in rows.
especially smooth, location chip it down. Magnify the bottom, darting and then habitual shadow, scene bending.
We're all moving toward storytelling in digital space, and some of the most interesting experiments that are happening are in electronic literature.
You're coming out of a Dadaist tradition of saying there's something beyond this, and I'm going to rearrange this stuff and find other layers beyond the visible, or make other layers.
I think electronic literature is digital-born literature that would not exist otherwise than by mediation through a computer.
Electronic literature is the exploration of how we can tell stories with the augmentation of technology. So what technology makes possible in our storytelling palette. I'm particularly thinking about kind of the networked and connective tissues of literature and storytelling, and the ways that we realize those through the technologies we already use all the time, particularly on the web.
The lack of clear signals isn't an attempt to vex you, rather an invitation to read either inquisitively or playfully and also at depth. Click on words that interest you or invite you.
Electronic literature can be a number of things. It's interactive. It has to do with words and images.
I go in and out of what to call myself. I still say different things. Within the community, I create electronic literature, which I would call poetic narrative. So I'm a poet who works with narrative.
I think the day that comes that we don't actually distinguish it as electronic literature is the day that we finally, would be the day that, we don't have to ask questions like that.
An otherworldly glass of beer? But wouldn't you like an otherworldly glass of beer? But wouldn't you like an otherworldly glass of blackberry bushes? Just beside the trail as you crest the hill, amber-colored beer in a
Traversal is a process by which a user, performer, author performs a work of electronic literature on the original hardware and with the original software for which the work was produced. It's intended to capture the cultural context of a work, and that includes everything from sounds to glitches to the look and feel of the interface, to the way we interact with the keyboard and those kinds of physical material processes. Structure first.
Yes.
We
yes,
have to
yes.
structure
equals
first,
meaning.
because you have to understand where your words are going to go.
Yes.
You can't just throw your words on a page. Welcome to the live stream traversal of Rob Swigart's Directions and Downtime, hosted by the Electronic Literature Lab here at Washington State University, Vancouver. I'm Dene Grigar, the director of the lab, and I'm glad to have you here today. For those of you unfamiliar with what a traversal is, it's the formal documentation process that was devised by Stuart Moulthrop and me, where an author performs their work on hardware and with software used at the time when the work was originally released. These performances are videotaped, edited, and then included with photographs of the physical media, a critical essay about the work, and social media post in the multimedia book entitled Rebooting Electronic Literature, and we're on our 5th volume of that book, by the way. So in keeping with the traversal tradition, Rob will be reading these works via CD-ROMs on which they were published on a G3 iMac Tangerine Bubble running System Software 9.2. This computer was released by the Apple Corporation in 1999, 5 years after Directions and 1 year before Downtime were circulating. Let me tell you a little bit about the works. Directions is subtitled A Quasi-Sentimental Pseudo-Scientific Hyperpoem. It's actually a collection of hyperpoems created on the HyperCard platform and published in 1994 in the Eastgate Quarterly Review of Hypertext, Volume 1, Number 4, along with Giuliano Franco's historical scholarly hypertext, Quam Artem Exarchus. Downtime, subtitled Takes of the Digital Age, is a collection of 21 stories published in 2000 that experiments with Macromedia Director as a publishing platform. The stories are woven together into a tight fabric of characters and settings. And much like the ensemble works of the period, like Magnolia, Pulp Fiction, and later Crash, the Downtime characters are cross paths. They show up in various parts of the stories, different places in the stories, and are connected as friends or lovers or neighbors or friends throughout the work. Additionally, coherence is achieved thematically through the computer terminology that emerged at the start of the digital age, when words like glitch and database and default and other concepts were entering into the public sphere. In a very frank and unvarnished style, Swigart recounts debts, divorces, drives to live, love affairs, recounting experiences the people navigating this new and strange world were going through. And really, their story is still ours today. Rob has authored 14 novels, many works of short stories and fiction, 2 computer games, and many other forms of writing over his lifetime. He was also a professor at San Jose University for 35 years and served as scholar at Stanford University Archaeology Center. The focus of his work has been on archaeology and ancient cultures. Readers of Direction will notice references to the cultures and mythologies of Egypt, Mesopotamia, Asia, and Latin America. And Downtime also weaves these ideas throughout characters such as Robert and Becky. So without any further ado, let's hear from Rob. Rob, thank you for being here today. We're so happy to have you. I'm going to go ahead and stop talking, but before I do want to show the physical media. This is the Downtime packaging, and this is the one for Directions, so we can get this on video. All right, so thank you.
Thank you, Dene. That was a very nice introduction. We're starting with Downtime, so as I open this and hope it works, this is my first bubble Macintosh. I was a company called Itzamna, which was the god of writing in the Maya world. We have created machines to bridge the gaps between us. When the machines fail and we cannot connect, It is called Downtime. Tales of the Computer Age by Rob Swigart. So that tells you who did it. And we have a little opening. That's temple at Chichen Itza. And that is a recognizable planet, I think. I did all the graphics in a program, the name of which escapes me now. But this is basically the splash screen table of contents for Downtime. And I'll just say very briefly that this is in the early to mid 80s, where I had been actually working part-time as a contract writer, technical writer at Apple. And somewhere along the line, I acquired a dictionary of computer terminology, and they were so kind of enchanting and mysterious that I thought they would make nice titles for short stories. And in my writing group, I started writing these short fables, I called them. The first one being called Downtime, because as we have just learned, downtime is what happens when a computer fails. All of these titles are computer terms, and all of the stories are about people in a fictional Silicon Valley who interact with each other and are in one way or another associated with the computer business. So we'll start, I think you can start with any term, but I wanted to point out that this is a marquee in an old-fashioned office building. So it's the little white figures, little white letters that are put onto a indented sort of felt background so they could be changed out. So these would be companies in the building that were listed in the lobby. So if we start with Downtime, we just click on
Downtime.
And it opens the first page of Downtime. Now,
how long has he been like this? The policeman asked.
There should be music playing.
He flipped open a leather-bound notebook, hinged at the top.
Okay.
Since I put the knife in him.
And there should be the narration
he thought
going.
About the knife.
Now I'm going to turn off the sound.
Steel, very sharp,
I hope.
And the handle was carved from some rich.
Anything happening? Oh, here. Come on. There. Have to relearn how to do this. Okay, so how long has he been like this? The policeman asked. He flipped open a leather-bound notebook hinged at the top. Since I put the knife in him, Liz said. She thought about the knife. Its blade was Sheffield steel, very sharp, and the handle was carved from some rich, hard wood. She thought walnut, dark like walnut. I see, he said, writing it down. Was the knife important to him? He bought the whole set at Macy's, she said. Perhaps we should go into the living room. For some reason, she nodded at the body. Of course, he said, moving through the door. Later, he set his glass of Chablis aside and asked, why do you think it's a midlife crisis? So I'll stop reading there. You can listen to the sound of me narrating this as part of the process of reading the story or experiencing the story. But I want to point out some of the other features of this because when Patrick and I were discussing using Director, I wanted to know what kinds of things that we could use that would make it seem somewhat hypertext-ish or hypertextoidal. And basically I chopped the stories into short bits, which I at that time called nits, or narrative units. An invention that I made that nobody has picked up on, but it's still out there if anybody wants it. What you can do, when we have this word in blue, is click on that and you get an annotation, which is called annotation. So this is a relatively humble kind of wine. What does it tell us about these people? So you can add annotations if you want. You can play the stories continuously. You can turn the volume up and down. Obviously, you can quit. You can go back and forth to the beginning or the end, and so on. But you can create a storyline, and this is a feature that I found interesting. But I want to go back to the contents just to see. So we have stories with various kinds of names. Burn in might suggest burning in a computer chip, which in fact is what it's about. A deadly embrace, which has ripe connotations for relationships, is actually about when a computer printer and the computer get into signaling each other at the same time and nothing happens. Describes a lot of relationships, I think. So all of these act as metaphors for the story. So I'm going to go into the glitch, partly because I like the sound that Alan Strange did for this particularly. And I'll turn it on. Oh, I didn't turn the sound on again, so I don't know if it's playing.
The boy with a knife in his chest went into a grocery store on the corner of Almaden Avenue and bought a Diet Cola.
Yeah.
Later, when the grocer told his wife about the incident, he described the knife.
So this is a story about a boy with a knife in his chest. Somebody has stabbed him. He's he was trying to rob somebody, and the guy turned the tables on him and stabbed him with his own knife. So he goes into this store, and this knife appears in many stories. It is a motif through it, and it is a bit of magical realism because it doesn't seem to kill anybody, but it is sticking in them. And he's now standing here waiting for a bus. I think he still has the knife in him. And he meets on the bus a woman who teaches music. And because she talks to him about music, he wants to learn how to play the clarinet. And the theme for the story is a beautiful clarinet piece. Now, if you wanted to make a story in which you wanted to make your own story, you would pick a word, any word on a page. Let us say, I don't know if a grocery store is going to be enough. You could do something, but there already is one called knife. So we'll collect that, if I can figure out how to do that. I don't know what this does. No, that takes me to a random place. Okay. That's a map of the interface. So, create a storyline. Nope, can't get out of that. In fact, this round mouse is confounding me. Oh, done. Okay. Well, let's, there's a place mark. Okay, those are create place marks. Now, how did we create a new story?
I think you click on swimming.
Hmm?
You click on swimming. Try clicking on swimming on the hyperlink word.
Well, that's an annotation.
You can add to that though too.
Now I've totally forgotten how to do that. Nope, that's the credits.
Done.
Yeah, done. Yeah, this one. Well, I thought it was create a storyline. All right, well, let's look at Knife, the storyline. It's already made. So we'll follow that story. Now, this collects every page in the entire project that has the word knife on it. it seems to me that it would have been interesting to randomize these as well. But if you read through them page by page, like this, you will get an entirely different story. I think it makes sense to do this after you've read the whole thing. But once you put the pages together, you get a very different experience of how these people interact with each other and how they operate. And this will all center around the word knife. You can also let this play continuously, and it will read it to you. So it's like, in this case, Grandpa reading you a bedtime story about a bunch of murderous people. And then very briefly, I'll just describe the different backgrounds, because a lot of this is random availability at the time. There were graphics programs that had these patterns, and if I go to different stories, I had a collection of different stones and woods. So I created the background for each story from a different one of those. Some of them granite, some of them marble, and different kinds of wood. And it was just because it was there. It wasn't for any artistic reason that I can think of. But the effect, I thought, was rather nice. So I'm a big believer in the random. And then we were going to talk about a story called Database, because that story did have database, yeah, one word.
Database.
Okay, now the sound is off. Okay, so this is a story which starts with an Egyptian parchment. The adoration of Ra when riseth he in horizon eastern of heaven is the literal translation of the hieroglyphs. And a character named Robert is staring at the parchment, and this is what he saw. And he's thinking, Ra rose, Ra rose, Ra Ra. Robert sighed, Ra, adoration of ruse, and or riseth when he, Ra, riseth, where, in eastern heaven, of course. Ra rose. There's a star, a standing man facing left, hands raised in a gesture of praise, connotations of adoration and prayer. And now it's Robert and Becky, and this is the story of Robert and Becky. Now, the origin of this story was grounded in something that actually happened. I was invited to a presentation at somebody's house by a guy who claimed that he was a deep scholar of ancient history, and that he believed fervently that the people of Atlantis had left hidden in the first book of the Hebrew Bible the secret of unlimited free energy, an obsession that this person had. And he had developed a theory that, and he had a PhD in physics, by the way, no slouch, also an expert on the TV show The Prisoner. That the code that he had embedded this secret in was a Cartesian code based in the Hebrew alphabet. And there were 27 letters in the original Hebrew alphabet, according to him, not according to what I know, but right. And there are 27 cubes in a Rubik's Cube. So it therefore had to be a three-dimensional Cartesian code. And not coincidentally, if you remove the letters of the first sentence of the Hebrew alphabet that did not appear in the alphabet, that did not appear in the sentence, from the Rubik's Cube, according to the way he laid it out, you had a little gap in the upper corner, which made it resemble, if a Rubik's Cube were a crystal of calcium carbonate, a crystal of calcium carbonate, which, it so happens, is limestone, which is the material from which the pyramids are made. So, his delusions, his ideas about this were extended in many directions. And there was another guy with him who had deliberately spent the night inside the pyramid in order to become an ancient priest of the Egyptians, which he did in his dream state, apparently. So, and I have to mention that there was a girl in a peasant dress who handed out crystals of calcium carbonate at the door when we came in, and wow. I was there with a friend, and we went outside and started laughing. Anyway, that was the inspiration for this story. So there is a relationship metaphor in that story, and I found it. So the stories had various origins of that kind as I was writing them. And I was writing them for the writing group, so I did one probably every month. And then I got to 21, and I don't know, we moved the venue of the writing group or something, so I stopped. But the last story, Array, is a kind of concluding story. And the order in which they are laid out on the contents board in columns is a logical one. So that's the way you would play it. If you played it straight through and just listened to it, that's how you would get it. But you can play the stories or hear the stories or listen to the stories in any order because they are each self-contained, and yet together they do create, I think, my portrait of Silicon Valley in the 1980s when the computer business was arising and I was working as a technical writer at Apple and doing computer games. So I think that's pretty much all I can say about it. Is that adequate?
That's good.
Okay, so we will quit. And it gives me the option to not quit.
Yep.
But I'm going to quit anyway.
I think you can quit.
Did I? Oh.
Have you?
Clicked on no. Okay. So there it is. That's downtime. It was an enormous amount of work, working with the composer, Alan Strange, who did the music for it. I would read a story to him, and he would write the music on the spot. And we'd do a couple of them a week like that. And then we went into a studio, recorded the narration, and mixed the music into that. So it's now available as an audiobook, pretty much the way it is in the program.
Now we're going to do directions. Directions.
Oh, I have to do that.
Had to.
Okay, now we will do directions. I got it mixed up. Okay, directions. Okay, in this period, I was in my writing group was a poet named Bill Dickey, a wonderful poet and a wonderful critic, and he and I both got fascinated with HyperCard when it came out, and we both played around with it. And he's done a number of HyperCard poems he did before he passed, and I was playing with it, and I did this one. And Dene asked me if I had any planning documents for this, and I had absolutely no planning documents for this. I sat down with HyperCard, and I said, "What shall I do? Blank card." And I thought, well, you know, what would make a nice table of contents would be the table of the elements, and elementary, the elemental table. And I thought, and where do we go from the elemental table? Well, what do you do when you click on something? You go off in a direction. So it became the elemental table of directions. And then my initial idea was I would do a link for every one of the elements, of which there are on this one, 75 or so. We don't have the really, we go up to 103. But that turned out to be quite a bit of work because each one of those little tiny squares had to become a link. So I kind of used areas. And you used to be able to tell where the links were. So there would be a square around this, and I know one of the other traversals I saw, you could do that. But I'm going to have to do this at random because I don't remember where they are. But I know there's pretty much the whole thing is covered with buttons. So this leads to a sand dune and a little text that says, "In the desolation of empty places she wept without solace. The one-legged man touched her, and she sleep into a that could last forever." Oh, I think there's a glitch in the remake here. That's clearly a link, but I think she
Sleep?
Stepped into a sleep that could last forever. I think that sleep belongs out there. So we're seeing the effects of obsolescence on electronic literature. I got interviewed for an essay in Atlantic, I think, on obsolescence because everything I had done was obsolete and unreadable, which meant that everything I did was very zen, which meant that you left no footprints in the water. So if sleep is a link, we'll click on it. And yes, it takes us to this swirling mess. Others who couldn't see the invisible spirits of their dreams in the dark despaired, and in less time than it takes to tease a heart from its ribs, plunged all the families into restless sleep. So that picks up the sleep theme. This link leads to the abandoned chamber draped with lost memories. Obviously, I could make circles that could elongate in various directions. Let's see, I think these, maybe there's is that a link? No. Does it change when there's, no?
I thought I had to click around and find it. Try the words. Try the words. I think the words.
Memories, that seems like a likely link. Yes. Elemental, and in the offing, a bronze bell, its memory lost. Should have heard the bronze bell. Can we hear the sound?
We have it turned on.
Hmm?
Do you have the sound turned off?
That was in downtime. Sound is not turned off in this.
There's a lot of sound in this one.
There we are. How did that happen?
Magic.
Oh, somebody pressed a button without our being able to see. Memory drowns in 7 kinds of pain. They were exquisite. After a year, floated to a surface swollen with progeny, and will return. And we get a little graphic of Hiroshige's wave, which, aha! Okay, now we have a choice, high priest or completion. I think we're looking at complete, no, that's not completion. Okay, high priest. This is a Maya image. He was always one who felt blessed. He had family, children, income from prudent investments. He exercised regularly, ate with care only those foods approved by the medical men, and wore clothes appropriate to his standing in the community. Yet when he died, suddenly in his prime, he left nothing but 462 hours of videotape of vegetables rotting beside his garage. Watching the tapes was said to be an exercise in demonic possession, and those who survived were considered fit for high, I think it said office. The priest, and now we're in Egyptian territory, wept when he saw what he had done, for the maiden's eyes had darkened with fear. Yet it was necessary for the good of them all that he do what he had done. He took from each that which she most feared, depriving her forever of her most exquisite pleasure, the one that it would allow her to marry well. Okay, now we have the consequence of success or the consequence of failure. Shall we pitch the consequence of failure? Well, that would be it. Completion. Completion restores the pillar. So, and what does the consequence of success? Takes us to Isis. Isis speaks of her fertility as if it were the river without end, yet there would be consequences. If you know a little bit about Isis, she's looking for her brother Osiris. Here is the region of uncertainty. Entry is forbidden. Shall we enter? Ah, nice chime. They said that because the center defined the periphery, the high priest could no longer maintain authority, and so gave up both his legs. Some found the sight of him walking on his hands comic, but when his face, moon-shaped and serene, glowed from between his shoulders, they laughed with delight, clapping their hands. And that sort of invites a link. Yes. This is Lady Chalk. Among the K'chun, the sensation of corporeal decay is said to be exquisite and palpable. The priestess of sin, the K'chun capital city of broad plazas and intense nighttime heat, was reported to be an expert at the application of the instruments of decay. She lived alone, as all priestesses must, in the palace of fevers, and sang the querulous songs of her office. Her husband, forbidden to see her at any time other than the dark of the moon, said to her on more than one occasion, "It is without rancor that I pierce my earlobes, my penis, my tongue, with the urchin spine, the stingray spine, for what flows from my wound is the blood of kings." Her laughter rippled like jade in the water. The pain made her husband shiver with delight, even as the beetles crawled through the sockets of his rotting eyes. It was a custom of Maya kings to perforate themselves in those places with stingray spines and bleed before the people in order to communicate with the gods. It's also a known way of tripping, of getting into an altered state. So she is dragging a rope with spines on it through her tongue and catching the blood in this bowl. Maya mythology is quite intriguing. These glyphs describe the nature of pain in its 7 formal varieties. Glyph 1 denotes loss of future. Few can remember that far forward, which is why the priestess guards this glyph with her warrior soul and kills anyone who, probably off the bottom of the screen. That suggests a link. Direction is neither casual nor easily known. Yet love had no impact on the people's despair as the world darkened around them. And now we're back here. Let's see, yes. Periphery returns to the elemental table. So we can go back to the beginning and try a different region. It is in the reverberations of lust that the empire found itself in difficulty. Beyond the 2nd century, no one could see. And we go back to that. And we go back to the high priest, and now maybe the mirror widened defeats loss. And then we click on the eye, and the eye splits. The shattered eye sees deeper without deceit. And we're beginning to loop back through some of the former cards, and I'm not sure there's any. Yeah, so we're beginning to go through. I think there's more than one here, yeah. Okay. Others who couldn't see the invisible spirits of their dreams in the dark despaired. We've seen this one. And we've seen this one. I think Memories is the only one there. Memory again. Yep. Memory drowns in 7 kinds of pain. They were exquisite. After a year, floated to the surface, swollen with progeny, and will return. So, beginning to repeat. So, I would suggest stopping here. Feel free to explore at your leisure. So then we have to figure out how to quit. Yep. There we go.
Segment. So thank you so much for being here, and gosh, it's great to hear your voice reading this. Thank you, Rob.
It's been a pleasure.
We have an audience here in the room. We also have an audience online through the YouTube chat that I've been moderating. So thank you, all of you that are here today. Know that if you have questions, please, if you're online, please just drop them in the chat, and I'll ask Rob directly. He can answer you live through the camera. And then in the room, if you have questions, be sure to ask, but I'd like to start with one myself. So the second work that you read was actually the first of the 2, published in 1994, Mythologies, and you were covering mythologies from a lot of different cultures, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Latin American, Asian. But in talking about the second work, the 2000, the year 2000, the Downtime, it seems to me, maybe I'm reading this a little bit too much into it, but you were producing the mythology of the computer age.
Yes. That was the intent.
I did read that. Right?
You did read that right.
Good.
That was, yes.
Oh, good. So I get an A+ on that one.
You do.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yep. Those are foundational tales.
Perfect. Then talk about that a little bit. How did you imagine that to be our mythologies? And what does that say about our culture?
The 80s, well, first of all, the 70s were the funniest decade in human history. And the 80s were less funny. So I was maybe feeling nostalgic for
the 70s?
The 70s. And the 70s were marked by the appearance, in California at least, of psychology and New Age religions. And some of these characters reflect all of that. There's a lot of psychology in it, and there's possibly some New Agey religion. I think one of the characters is a New Age artist type. Yes. And it's the Timothy Leary thought the computer was the new LSD. And he really, in fact, he said nice things about Portal on the back of the jacket. I don't think that the computer is the new LSD, but it certainly does change the way we perceive and think about the experience of interacting with text. And I've always been interested in the origins of writing in Mesopotamian, Sumerian cuneiform, and how that really became not only an external memory device, but a way of interacting with people from the past. And Bill Bly's We Descend is all about that. It's all about this conversation that you're having with people whose writing you can read, so you're hearing them, they're not hearing you in return, and they're not responding to you. But it's a dialogue anyway, because you're answering. And it's changed the way everything works. So I think that Silicon Valley did turn out to be a kind of Mesopotamia of the change in the way media works in our lives. And certainly my impulse to get my phone out now and make sure my emails haven't updated is because of that. I'm not going to get my phone out, but I would.
I asked you, and I want to put this on record because you're good friends with Richard Holton,
yep,
who we're good friends with, and his work for Eastgate Finhorn on acid. His work is all about numerology. Everything boils down to 3. So when I saw your interface for Downtime and I saw 21 stories, yeah. I thought, oh my gosh, 2 and 1 is 3. He's in there with Richard Holton doing this kind of work, and you said no.
No, totally. Everything's random.
Everything's random.
I like random. I like accidents. And I mentioned earlier to you that my friend Jeff Kripal, told me once of what he called the library angel. You go to the library and you start looking for a particular book, and pretty soon you're picking up a book nearby that was there because it was there, and then you get attracted to that, and that leads you to another book. And when I was researching my 3rd book, which retells the Gilgamesh story, I was in the Stanford Library, and there were books about cuneiform near the books about Gilgamesh, and I started looking at them, and I got intrigued by that. And it's like one thing led to another. That's the library angel. She's there to tell you what to read. And I think that random texts, same with Wikipedia, which can lead you into all kinds of directions, and then you cannot find your way back. But you don't have to, because you remember, sort of.
You know, Mark Bernstein talked a lot about the fear in the early days of hypertext of getting lost, of getting so far out from where you started that you can't come back. And then he said, that was ridiculous. Of course we could find our way back. And I think that's what you're saying here.
Well, I'm saying you know what you looked up first.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find your way back. Retracing your path may not be so easy. But I think the randomization just triggers new ideas and new things. And I really enjoy the play. And HyperCard Directions was all play. It was just, oh, I can do this tower. Oh, I can make it fall down. Oh, I can put this picture I have of the Maya kings, the lintel from Yaxchilan. I can put that in, and then I can make up a little story about what's going on there. And I didn't have an overall plan. But I've read an essay that says there is an overall plan.
I just think it's interesting because when I was doing my homework because it's been years since I've read these, right? And I was doing my homework for this event, and I read through Directions first because it was the first work, and then I went to Downtime. And the difference between the two are so striking because, well, for obvious reasons, the content, but also the structure. The first one seems to have not that kind of core, whereas you know, the second one, I mean, it looks like it does have a core, but then when you get into it, you kind of lose your place.
Yeah.
Whereas the second one, you always can come back. It's got the same kind of, you know, structural interface, but it's harder to get lost in that one.
Yeah. Well, they were very different literary products done in reverse order. Mm-hmm. The Downtime stories were written before I decided I could do something quasi-hypertextual with it. whereas the hypercard piece was done because it could be hypertextual from the beginning. It was all based on the idea of linking things. And some of the links are suggestive and some of them are mysterious. I probably had something in mind when I was creating them about where I placed them on the page, but I don't remember what that was.
So that's good to hear and get that on record too, is that the downtime predates, the writing of it predates the directions. And it was originally a print-based writing that you then later put into this environment. That makes a lot of sense.
And I carved it up into nits, but it carved very nicely into nits. It was written in little narrative units. It felt that way. So that was no problem at all. And there's that little click at the end of each page when you turn the page, because I wanted to mark an ending and a beginning. I think it was important that each one of those is separate as well as continuous.
Another question is about the 5 directions. In directions, you have 5 directions, and I actually list them. I have the 5 laid out here. If I can scroll back. Yes. 5 directions: death beside a river, loss in the return, ripples destroy memory, the glyph of connection, only down offers no hope. So that shows up in on one interface. So were the 5 directions the 5 parts of the pyramid? The 5 sides of a pyramid?
Sure.
I just was, well, don't say it if it's not true.
At the bottom.
I mean, 4 and 5. I just wondered because that 5 figures in so strongly on in that piece.
Well, the pentagram is a basic shape.
Yeah.
Especially in magic. So, yeah, I'll buy that.
Okay.
I think it was in the brain somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah. But I like the way things collide with each other and spark something I hadn't thought of. And everything that I pick a graphic. I think I did this first. I'd pick a graphic, Hiroshige's wave or the universe or those draped ovals. And then I would write a little text that it suggested to me. And since I did this all pretty much as a unit, I think they have the connections of my mind working at the time. But I didn't plan them. It was not Paradise Lost. I didn't want to start with the fall. They were meant to be, to collide from different directions in different order.
Does anyone in the audience have a question?
Yes, I do.
Please, Gabrielle.
Many hypertext works are recursive, and like with what we saw in today's traversal. In mythology, we've always used stories to understand, explain, and illustrate cycles. In your opinion, what is the importance of the recursiveness of our stories, and what do you think that says about today's mythologies?
Boy, that is a great question, and it's reminding me of something entirely different, which is I did an essay for the Electronic Book Review on the nature of time and the relationship of the establishment of the house in the what's called the PPNB, the Neolithic, pre-pottery Neolithic B period, when the house went from round to square. And I thought, this is how they mark time now, because the house now lasts longer than a lifetime. And probably during most of the Paleolithic, most of our time on Earth, we've been spent with the cycles of time. The yearly cycle, the seasonal cycle, the daily cycle, the monthly cycle, women's menstruation cycles. All of these are cycles. They come back. They recur. And that's the recursive mindset that we have built into us. When we started to see that the house lasted longer than a lifetime, and that somebody had to take over the house when we die, and that had to be a son, and we started to have to control women's reproduction because we had to be sure that that was our son. We built the house. So the house is now creating a linear time, and it's like a wagon wheel rolling over the ground, over the mound at Çatalhöyük. and laying out a linear timeline. So we started to linearize things and say it's not a cycle, it's continuous. There's a past, present, and a future. The past is known, present is unfolding, the future will exist. And then we started trying to think, how can we see what's happening in the future? And there's hints of kind of shamanism or oracles in directions, I think. But I think that the circular, the cycle of time mindset is built into us. It's basically in the blood. It's in the circulation of the blood in our bodies, in the cycle of birth and death, out of the ground, from dust to dust, all of that stuff. It's all part of it. So we're both. And maybe I was trying to get a little more circularity in there. Don't know if that answers.
Thank you.
But
anyone else have a question? Richard.
I'm always kind of fascinated by the creative process with digital technology, digital media, and how the medium, the chosen medium or the chosen tool can kind of inspire the work, or the work inspires the choice of tool. So I was interested when you said you were kind of looking at the blank HyperCard interface and thinking, what would be a good navigational structure? And that seems to be where you began with directions. Can you speak to how HyperCard itself, or your choice of medium, perhaps medium first, inspired your creation process?
Yeah, I can respond to the question, which is all I can do. HyperCard was a technology. It was produced by a technology company. Technology, this was the new age of technology. And Silicon Valley that was it. So that meant science to me. And the table of elements was a kind of core science, foundational science image. So putting that image on the card gave me the title, the sort of pseudo-scientific hyperpoem idea. And that sort of triggered that idea. And then using the table as a way of going off in different directions. So that's just the way it connected. But the idea was really science and technology. And then bringing the mythology in was a way of saying, this is another mythology, I think. If not, I just made that up.
So when I was going through directions this weekend, I was telling you that I kept getting in that loop.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't get out of the loop without having to quit and start over again. And I wondered at the time if that loop was intentional, because it does talk about this, cycles of life and death.
Yeah, but I don't. That was not intentional.
Okay.
We're not supposed to get trapped in a loop. And I have a feeling that some of the buttons may have gotten displaced off the screen, and now because imagine this has been buried for 5,000 years, and we don't know what it is, and we're trying to recreate how people might have used it. This is what archaeologists do. They find this thing and they go, ritual. That's the first word out of their mouths, Probably wasn't ritual, it was probably for tossing the salad, but the HyperCard itself is gone from our world. Some of the ghost of some of the things you could do with it remain, and we can read into the intent, and if I could meet Bill Atkinson again, I'd ask him a lot of questions about it. But I think that there's a lot that's lost, and there are actually people I could ask that might remember. But I think that the technology itself is just rusted or decayed.
Deprecated.
There's a lot of talk about decay in there, as you probably remember.
Well, bit rot, a little bit rot here.
Bit
and
rot,
there.
yes.
That's what we called it.
Yeah.
The rotting of bits.
So I didn't expect it to last this long, frankly. It's almost like seeing the mummy come up out of the ground.
But nobody
ripping
thought
its-
these were going to last. I mean, nobody thought these were going to last. I
No.
mean, we were told when we bought the floppy disks that they had maybe 10 years on them.
Yeah.
And as I told my students in the hypertext class, the biggest, the kind of glitch in your heart is when you put that disk in and you get the message, this disk is unreadable, do you want to initialize it? And you go, no. And, and it was fine when this work was in circulation, you could just buy another copy.
Yeah.
But now it's not in circulation anymore, and it's under copyright, so we can't just drop it in DOSBox and call it good. And even if we could, it's not the same thing as we were talking about today.
And the machines have to be in museums now.
Yes, and these machines, which is just, that's the other thing. These machines, this one here, this little bubble that we call BB-8 so lovingly, this was, late 90s, right, 1999.
Yeah.
And so that's over 20 years old. We didn't think these computers were going to last that long, but the Macs have lasted a long time, and I've got some in the lab that have lasted 35 to 40 years, and they all work.
Yeah, I know people who have old ones.
But the thing that I think is also, I'm going to try to take this back to your work with PAD, because I think you're involved in the PAD project. Is that correct? The preservation, archiving, and were you part of that project, Rob? PAD? Yes, you. Were you part of the PAD project? I thought you were part of the ELO's PAD project on the first round, looking at
good
the
Lord.
obsolescence.
Well, that's almost that old.
I know. You were part of that the discussion in the early days.
Yeah.
And
yeah, we did have discussions.
we did have discussions about it, and people were really angry because they didn't want to admit this stuff was going to die. And I think the other thing you mentioned about Bill Atkinson's, you wish he was, able to be here to ask him questions. I mean, the whole point of trying to get these works documented on video right now with the author is that one day we'll all be gone.
Yeah.
This will be gone. This floppy disk won't work anymore. This CD-ROM won't work. We're going to be dead. What's left of all of this is just mythologies.
Yep.
And what tales
The
are they going to tell
memory
about
of a
us?
memory.
Memory of the memory. And what stories are they going to tell about Dina Larson and Ted Nelson at the conference in incubation, which I told my students about? And what are they going to tell about Rob Swigart and Richard Holton and Bill Bly and that group hanging out together, and Tenac and the East Coast? I mean, there's all these stories we want to get written down so that there is a mythology left behind for all of us.
Dina's a good one for the stories.
Oh yeah, she's good for this.
Yeah.
And Bill Dickey. I mean, that's another person that needs to be
Yeah,
documented.
he's gone.
He's gone.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But yeah, your work is still working. The work is still working, and and we're documenting it now.
The mummy lives.
The mummy lives, and because I do own these copies myself, Mark Bernstein has given me permission. Of course, copyright allows me to have a digital copy of it in deep freeze. So Greg has produced digital copies of all these works in deep freeze. So when these copies die, and the notion that this isn't stealing anymore, that this is able to be shared, because without it we can't even talk about this work. I mean, at that point we might be able to share those digital files again.
Well, there's a lot of Sumerian literature that has disappeared because we have fragments of tablets.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of the universe.
Well, I was telling you when I was at in Istanbul, and I was at the National Museum, and they had the Gilgamesh on the wall, right? They have the little tablets on the wall in order that you should be reading it.
Yeah.
And you can see
Did you read it?
I can't read cuneiform, darn it. But you could tell they have at the time I was there, they had the translations right underneath it. But you could see where whole little tablets were missing.
Yeah.
And somebody had to reconstruct it based on logic, or pieces of the tablet were broken, and somebody reconstructed that tablet piece. I mean, that's essentially what we're doing now, is reconstructing our histories.
Yeah. I was watching a documentary about the Maya the other day, and they were reassembling a pot that was covered with writing. And they were filling in the missing places.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Well, that Beowulf, I mean, one of my professors at the university I graduated with my PhD from, there were people he knew that did that with Beowulf. Somebody had to write that down, and then of course its paper is not durable. Paper does die.
It's more durable than a lot of stuff.
But it's still not completely
than
nothing.
bits. It's
lasts
more durable
forever.
than bits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, clay tablets are the most durable, and maybe we should go back to that.
Or stone tablets.
Stone tablets are good, but they're hard to chisel.
That's
Writing
true.
is very slow.
That's true. Well, you know, I was talking to John Barber. John Barber's doing the sound today, and he works in working with radio, like radio productions of the Golden Age and beyond and thereafter. And there's so many works that were, you know, performed on radio that don't exist anymore. There's just references to them.
Same with film.
Film the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, how much celluloid was destroyed when...
Yeah, I mean, the irony of clay tablets is that they were preserved because they were throwaway and there was a fire. So the opposite of paper.
Yeah. Do we have more questions from the audience?
Do you think that the affordances of like HyperCard and the original programs that you use creating destinations and downtime is integral to how those works are presented? And do you think that modern technologies can create similar works that have the same feel to them? Or I guess the question is, do you think that the way the interfaces look and feel is essential to the presentation of like works like that?
Absolutely. It's like if you're using a stylus on clay, it determines how you write. You have to use straight lines. You make 3 lines like that and you create a star. And you say, oh, star. You got your first piece of writing. You mentioned using Director in downtime. It determined what was possible. And way back when we were doing Portal, I would ask the kids, because they were all teenagers, you know, what can we do? Can we do this? I'd think up something and say, can we do this? And they'd say, oh no, we can't do that. And 2 days later, one of them would say, I figured out how to do that. So sometimes it was an interaction. You could challenge them, and they would come up with a way to do it. But the technology definitely determines what you do with it and shapes it a lot. You know, Portal was written in machine code language, which is like, you know, make my head explode. So it seemed like it was very limited, but in fact they were ingenious. So you're always pushing the envelope on it.
Gotta have limits to innovate.
Well, Rob is here because one of the main reasons he's here is because the students in the senior seminar are taking a small sliver of Portal, which is epic in size, space and time. It transcends 11 dimensions. I mean, it's just huge. And putting it into a 25-minute gameplay. So just to bring in Portal, even though we didn't perform it today, we should probably bring you back for that in the future. But interesting thing about Portal is you develop an entire world in that one, which is so different from, I mean, these are stories and poems. That's an epic story, almost Homeric in nature.
Yeah.
And you developed your own mythologies, and that was all centered on Peter DeVore.
Yeah. Yeah, that was deliberate. That was more deliberate. I was inspired by the Dune series for that, you know. And who plays computer games in 1984? Teenage boys mostly. And now those teenage boys are in their 50s and writing me letters about how important that was to them. I go, wow, I didn't expect that. But it's really interesting. I had a lot of fun with that. And it was very clear, you know, it was so early in the technology that how are you going to tell a story? I had often thought since the beginning of computers that this was a doorway, a portal into another space through which you could tell stories. And then it came down to, I got the opportunity to do it. And I said, well, there are 3 things people use computers for. Word processing, not interesting, it's just text on a screen. Spreadsheets, you know, spreadsheet wars, you know, database. So we have a database that gradually fills in behind the screen through your interaction with a character. And that became the conceit of the story.
Well, you're also looking at making up what the world beyond the Earth is, and that's the 11 dimensions.
Yeah. Well, I was set up for a sequel, but was not to be.
Maybe the next novel.
Next time. Next lifetime.
Any other questions? I think that might be all then. Thank you so much for being here, and I can't tell you how much it means to me to be able to document these works. The next step for this is for us to, we're going to be photographing these physical objects that come with this,
yeah, I've seen
and collecting this, all the social media and the chat that happened today, and then I'll be writing a couple of essays about it and putting it into the book. And we'll be joining with, we're hoping to get Dina Larson to do Century Cross with us this year as another traversal.
Great.
And then we'll have probably Kate Pullinger's work in here as well. So we'll be publishing this probably the end of summer. So,
Okay.
5th volume.
We will be, my heirs, if not me, will be looking forward to it.
Well, hopefully you, and you'll be back again for another event, maybe to do Portal
Okay,
next
it'd
time.
be a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Thank you, audience out in the YouTube world, and we'll see you at the next event.